I've been playing Halo 2 on PC lately through the excellent fan mod, Project Cartographer, which not only removes many of the nasty Games for Windows Live features, but inserts much-loved quality of life features such as field of view sliders, reticle options, and the like. There's even an option to scale up a lot of the models to be the same quality ones that you see in cutscenes, so model quality is excellent. Since nothing is sacred to me, I installed Reshade on Halo 2 and was curious to see what we could do to the visual presentation of the game. Reshade is an excellent tool for PC and allows you to inject graphical effects into your PC games, pushing them past what they look like normally. Feel like an old game looks just a bit too old? Add Reshade and get to work improving the shading and lighting. Feel like a new modern game lacks in a few areas, such as horror games being a bit too bright? Add Reshade and turn up those shadows. My skills with Reshade, or for some, my destructive powers, have grown since my last video on the topic, and I was excited to crack my knuckles and get to work. I dropped onto the surface of Delta Halo as the Master Chief, and normally I'd go all out and add all sorts of ridiculous nonsense, but this was a warm-up. Halo 2 was relatively new to me. I thought we'd start small and humble. I wanted to try to replicate the lighting and color palette of Halo 2 Anniversary, and maybe see if we can get the visuals close, even if we can't actually replicate them due to, Halo 2 Anniversary obviously having different models and textures. First thing I did was add anti-aliasing to the image. For those who don't know what anti-aliasing is, games are made up of pixels, right? Tiny colored squares on your screen that, when all assembled, form the image we now see. The issue is that there are only so many pixels on your screen. The limited number of pixels that make up your monitor can't fully portray what's supposed to be there. Things like fences off in the distance are usually the bane of bad aliasing. You'll notice in Halo 2 that the edges of that drop pod door over there are jagged and almost kind of look like stairs instead of a straight line. By enabling anti-aliasing via Reshade, specifically SMAA, you'll notice that the jaggies have been smoothed out. There are many different forms of anti-aliasing that we never see, silently working under the hood to clean out the pixels and pretty up the images in our games. Next, I injected Ambient Occlusion, which is a graphical trick to make shadows and lighting seem a bit more natural. Reshade's form of Ambient Occlusion is a bit primitive, but it does its job brilliantly. Unfortunately, it requires a lot of fiddling from game to game to get it working, and man, it was really hard to get working in Halo 2. Shadows injected via Reshade kept shining through my arms and guns. It was like I was a ghost or something. Reshade tends to struggle a bit with 3D effects such as ambient occlusion or depth of field when you're using the game's built-in anti-aliasing that can be toggled in the options menu. By disabling Halo 2's built-in anti-aliasing, it allows the program to calm down and then count each pixel and actually understand the depth of the screen. And then you don't need to worry about the pixelated image because you're just using Reshade to clean everything up. So this is just a warning. Whenever you're using Reshade, turn off anti-aliasing. The Ambient Occlusion shader is a great way to add some much-needed depth to older games, but be warned. Due to how Reshade implements it, it will always shine through transparent effects such as fog, windows, smoke, etc., etc. So if you have it up too high, if you have the Ambient Occlusion effect too dark and aggressive, it can sometimes be distracting when shadows will bleed through grenade explosions. I tuned the shadows to look just right so that they weren't too distracting. With Ambient Occlusion here, I added a depth haze in the background to give objects in the distance a blurriness, and then opened up the color editor to begin manually tweaking colors to match Halo 2 Anniversary. It's really fun to adjust each individual color on screen and figure out the visual sweet spot to really make the image pop. I'd imagine for colorblind folk, this Reshade tool could be used to make games look prettier for them specifically. And here, I got it mostly looking right, adding a sharpening filter to highlight detail, and then went on to the big thing that would really make it look like Halo 2 Anniversary. Bloom. Halo 2 Anniversary uses a more complex and realistic lighting model than the original game, which, go figure, Halo 2 Anniversary came out 10 years later. In real life, things refract light and scatter it around the environment. If light impacts a yellow surface, that yellow will project all around the place. It's why the color palette of Halo 2 can change in Anniversary. Environments like New Mombasa with its sandy streets look a lot more yellow in Halo 2 Anniversary because that's how it would look if the light behaved realistically, bouncing off the sand and stone. After about 5 or so minutes of fiddling with the bloom filter, I got it to adjust itself dynamically depending on light levels. Indoors are dark and outsides are bright, and surfaces hit by sunlight will bounce the light off of them and into my screen, but not in a distracting way. Something I was rather disappointed with, though, when viewing my creation, was the way it couldn't get grass to look quite right. It was always a bit too aggressively shaded by the ambient occlusion effect. Halo Combat Evolved's grass isn't affected by ambient occlusion, and the image looked a bit cleaner due to it. But Halo 2 has grass everywhere that's now impacted by ambient occlusion, and it looked like a swamp at points because of how dark and muddy the shading got. It's okay though, this will be an ongoing process and I'm sure I'll eventually figure it out perfectly. But for now, I was quite happy with the results. It's hard to explain, but the depth haze in the background and the bloom gave the world of Delta Halo this impossible vastness that reminded me a lot of the second level of Combat Evolved, despite Halo 2's levels being a lot more narrow and restrictive. The Warthog looked really cool as well, with its grooves and detail containing dark shadows and the rear lights glowing an angry red due to my fiddling with the colors. I noticed inside a Forerunner structure that the ambient occlusion worked really well in this artificial environment, so it got me thinking, maybe it would just function better in artificial structures. I had to see if this was the case, so I popped on over to Sacred Icon, and sure enough, it did look better without grass there to mess with the reshade. Halo 2's rather flat lighting and coloring really sucked out the beauty of its environments when compared to Combat Evolved, so seeing Halo 2 actually properly come to life like this was really something. I'll have to do further tweaking because the bloom was still tuned for the previous level to feel like outside sunlight, and it really showed at points. But I was really impressed with how grand it made all the Forerunner structures look. Now I was curious to see what it would look like in UNSC structures, so I hopped on over to Cairo Station, my favorite Halo 2 level, and I also felt rather happy with the results. So, lesson learned, I guess. Halo 2's outdoor areas need a lot of extra care and further experimentation, but Reshade lends itself very well just naturally to indoor areas. Now, it was time for me to goof off a bit. I've been playing Borderlands 3 lately, so I gave Halo 2 a Borderlands makeover with a cartoon filter, and surprisingly, it wasn't the worst thing in the world. It looked pretty on point actually, and it helps that Borderlands 3 just naturally has some pretty low-resolution textures and terrible animation quality, so it fit right at home here in 2004's Halo 2. It was really cool looking.
Nice, mate.
Hoorah!
I closed my goof-off session with a CRT filter to emulate the feeling of playing it on my friend's terrible TV when we were kids. His TV was so fuzzy, I could barely make out the details of the brutes during gameplay. I distinctly remember actually thinking that the brutes had horns or something. It was really hard just to see them. I'll have to inject Reshade into games like Sonic Adventure 2 on Steam so I can emulate that CRT TV as well for the authentic experience. Halo 2 is not my favorite game in the original Halo trilogy. It's not even one of my favorite Halos period, but screwing around with it like this gave me a new level of appreciation. I'd love to find out if tools like open source exist for it, or if there are ways to no-clip and explore environments outside of my character model. I had a lot of fun live streaming the time that the chat and I messed with Reshade and Halo Reach back during the campaign flight on PC, so maybe a second stream for Halo 2 Reshade is in order.